for the second round of the 1993 World Schools Debating Championships. We're bringing this to you from McCoy High School. It's a buzz of a place right now as the debaters have finished round one and they're preparing for round two. My name is Larry Boswell. Dennis Bonnet will also have a few comments for you along the way as we want to try to bring you up to date and summarize round one and then bring you this round in just a moment. First of all, from that first round, the results are as follows. The debate between New Zealand and the Netherlands was decided in favor of New Zealand, and that was a majority decision, and it'll either be a majority decision or a unanimous decision for the winner. In this case, a majority decision for New Zealand. The second debate was Scotland and Pakistan. This one was awarded to Pakistan, again, a majority decision. The third debate between the USA and South Africa, the win in this case went to South Africa, a majority decision. The fourth debate between Israel and Germany, Israel being declared the winner, again a majority decision. Next, the debate between Bermuda and Canada, the winner declared by majority decision, Canada. Then the debate between Peru and Australia, the winner, Australia, a unanimous decision. And then finally the debate that you saw just moments ago between England and Wales, declared unanimous decision winner, England. Well, the round two for this debate, World Debating Championships, is about to begin. We're going to have introduction of the debaters, and let me mention to you that our debate for this next hour and a few minutes, as you're going to have an opportunity to see, will be the debate between Canada and the USA. Certainly a lot of rivalry here, and the Canada having such a tremendous reputation on a worldwide basis, having been the world champions just a couple of years ago, and in fact giving us an opportunity here for hosting these this year. We're thrilled with this opportunity, and we're looking forward, I know many of us, to seeing this debate between our own Canadian debaters and those from south of the border from the US of A. The chairman for this evening, or this morning's debate, will be Chris Lang, and we'll be going to Chris for this debate in just a moment.
The 1993 World Schools Debating Championships at McCoy High School. The motion before this House today is, this House believes that environmental protection should be made the #1 priority worldwide. The proposers from Canada are Julie Daoust, Stephanie Murray, and Lisa Gu. The opposers from the United States are Suni Chandru, Christopher Regan, and Scott Fuqua. All speakers shall address the chair. On no account may anyone other than the chair, the 6 competitors, the judges, or officials of the 1993 competition speak or make interruption during the competitive part of each debate. Each competitor shall speak in the order called, for a maximum of 8 minutes. Then will follow a 2-minute pause, after which the first or second speaker on each side will give a reply speech with a maximum of 4 minutes, beginning with the opposition. Competitors exceeding the allotted time period by more than 30 seconds are liable to penalties. During the 8-minute speeches, time signals will be given after 1 minute and when 1 minute remains. Points of information may be offered by the 3 speakers of the opposing team between these times. Points of information may be accepted or refused at the discretion of the competitor then holding the floor. A time signal will be given twice when all 8 minutes have elapsed. No new contentions may be offered during the reply speeches. Time signals will be given at 3 minutes and twice at 4 minutes. When all speeches have concluded, the judges will retire for 5 minutes and discuss their verdict. If time permits, the audience will be permitted to make comments through the chair upon the topic. I would now like to introduce the first proposer from Canada, Julie Daoust, who will speak for the maximum of 8 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, the proposition believes and will prove that the environmental protection not only should be, but must be made a #1 priority worldwide. We have defined the terms of the resolution today. We've defined environmental protection as the safeguarding and shielding of the air, water, and life of our planet and its ecosystems from damage and destruction. We have defined number one priority as the main and primary concern. And we have defined worldwide as globally and across the globe. Mr. Chairman, the proposition has 4 aspects that will be discussed today between myself and my colleagues. These aspects are, A, that, as I've said, that the protection of the environment not only should be, but must be made the number one priority worldwide. I will show that there is a problem. B, the importance of making it the number one priority. B, the importance, C, the importance of making it a worldwide concern. And D, how? How do we make it the number one priority worldwide? The first aspect, as I said, is showing that there's a problem. And this won't be very difficult for me because everyone is aware that there is a problem. Everyone knows, everyone has heard about the problems concerning our environment. The Earth, Mr. Chairman, used to lose 1 species every 1,000 years. Now we lose one every 20 minutes. A minimum of 140 plant and animal species are condemned to extinction each day. Forests are vanishing at a rate of some 17 million hectares per year. That's about half the size of Finland. All of us have heard these statistics, and I could go on, but we know there is a problem. And the world knows there is a problem because there has been an international world summit on environment held in Rio, in Brazil. So now we know that there is a problem, but now we must take action. We must make it the number one priority, and this is our second aspect.
Point of information.
Yes?
Would you make any problem that you had the number one priority?
No. I'm just about to explain why the environment should be made the number one priority. The reason is that our environment is the basis of our life on Earth. We live off the environment. Mr. Chairman, in order to protect the human being, we must first protect its environment. We drink the water. Water comes from the environment. The soil, the vegetation, the food chain, very natural, ecological, the environment, once again. Even our economy, our industries, we take our natural resources and we build industries, we do worldwide exchanges. Our life, the basis of life is environment. That's why it should be our number one priority. And we are also saying that it should not only be the number one priority for some countries, but for everyone. Go ahead.
Is the only reason you want to protect the environment because it will sustain life?
Actually, we're saying that life itself is based on the environment, and that all aspects of life. And isn't it the number one basic instinct of the human being is to protect its own life? Survival is our basic need, and to ensure survival, we must protect our environment. Why should we make it worldwide? Because the actions of one country affects the others. And we have established that there is a problem, a worldwide problem. And wouldn't it be easier to solve it if we all work together to solve this problem? We can't deny that the world is a global village, is a global community. We must help each other solve this problem. We can't solve the problems in one country because...
Information.
Go ahead.
Are you proposing here that all the nations of the world get together to agree that environmental protection will be the number one priority, and that in order for this motion to be proposed, that everyone has to make that agreement?
I will explain how we, as the proposers, see that this will be the number one priority in just a few instances, if you will. I was still saying that it is important that we make it a worldwide number one priority because the problem is urgent and finding answers is urgent. Everyone has a role to play in our global society. Everyone must ensure that the human being survives. We must learn how to use our environment to our benefit, but not abuse our environment to our benefit. And here I come to the point of information on how we see this happening. We as the proposers are saying that, of course, different countries will have different ways of making this a #1 priority. We can't expect that, that all countries that are at different levels of development will be able to contribute in the same way. That's just simply not realistic. What we see is the developed countries leading the way. We see them leading the way because they are able to do so at this time. They have achieved a higher level of education. They have achieved a certain quality of life. Their population is not fighting for the basic needs, for the fundamentals, basic needs of survival. So we see these developed countries leading the way. And what do we mean by leading the way? We see them being able to make concessions, but most importantly, we see them being able to make some research and maybe take the lead in international discussions, like something we had in Brazil. But at that stage, we were at step 1. We were everyone recognizing that there is a problem. What we are suggesting is going beyond that. We know there's a problem. Now we make it the #1 priority worldwide. And we're not saying that underdeveloped countries won't do anything at all. We're just saying that their part is different. What we see is we can't see these developed countries doing the same thing, making concessions on beauty products or different kinds of automobiles when they have to think about feeding their children, when they're thinking about the basic fundamental needs of survival. But what we see is countries working together. What we know is that you don't have to be rich to keep the environment in mind. When leaders of every country, you can make this your #1 priority in your decision-making process. You can make it the #1 concern. And this is how we make it the #1 priority, because we've established that everyone is concerned. Now we must act. And this is how we see this happening. Maybe different countries will have greater ideas, but we see this concessions, discussions, and research being the key to the future. And once again, I'd like to finish by saying, Mr. Chairman, in order to protect the human being, the survival of the human race, we must protect our environment since it's the basis of all life. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call upon the first opposer, Suni Shundur, to speak for 8 minutes.
If of the many traits you select one and follow it blindly, then it becomes a falsehood and you a fanatic. Common sense demands that we have several priorities which are adaptable and flexible to our changing world. The proposition would like to say that their speech showed that environmental protection should be the #1 priority worldwide. But as I will point out in our speech, we as the opposition will prove that the resolution truly is false. We will divide the labor as follows. I will show you that #1 priorities have to be different. They have to be several. You can't simply have one. My colleague Chris will show you that having #1 priority is useless since balance is needed. And my colleague Scott will show you that if you protect the goals that environmental protection is needed for, you will also be protecting the environment. First, we can look at the fact that priorities are established when they're in conflict with other things. So basically, what the proposition has to show is that whenever environmental protection is in conflict with any other value, it should take priority. Now, they go on in their speech and they say that their justification for why environmental protection should be the #1 priority is because it's necessary for life. Again, they showed themselves that environmental protection in and of itself is simply an instrumental good. It's a means of achieving the higher priority, which is life itself. Now, if the proposition claims that the reason why we need environmental protection is life, then what they're saying is that life is the true #1 priority. And to achieve life, then we need environmental protection. So basically, the proposition themselves claim that life is the #1 priority. Now, we ask ourselves, why protect the environment? Is it simply to protect the environment in and of itself? Well, as the proposition agrees with us, we protect the environment for life, for the quality of life, or even for economic expansion. And because we protect the environment to achieve higher priorities, it can't be the number one priorities if it's simply a means of achieving other values. We can look at a simpler example. Let's look at this competition. Let's examine the resolution, winning is a number one priority of the World Schools Debating Championships. But winning in and of itself is of no value. Winning is good simply because it fosters excellence, it creates competition. It makes good debating skills. In the same way, environmental protection is of value simply because it allows other more important values, such as life and the quality of life, also to exist. This is simply an issue of logic. The proposition pointed out, why do we need environmental protection? We need it to protect life. We need it for other values. So how can it be the most important value if the only reason we have it, or the only reason we want it, is for it to protect another value? Now, in the proposition speech, they said that the number one human instinct is survival. So in that comment, basically, they said that survival should be the number one priority. Nowhere in this speech did they say that environmental protection in and of itself is a priority, or the number one priority. If environmental protection did not promote and sustain life, then it would be of no value. Thus, life in itself is the number one priority. Now, we go back to the resolution and exactly what the proposition is showing. Now, throughout their entire speech, they go on and they talk about the value of life and how there is a problem. Well, the opposition agrees there is a problem. But just because something is a problem doesn't mean that gives justification to make it a number one priority. For example, poverty is a problem in countries everywhere, and that also is logical. Yet, because it's a problem, should we make it the number one priority? It is a widespread problem, and something should be done. Yet, that doesn't make it a justification to make it the number one priority. Secondly, the proposition argues that environmental protection, by having the number one priority, something will be done. Yet they go on to say in their speech that the only incentive they have to protect the environment is simply because it is a means to other values. I cannot stress this enough. The proposition themselves agreed that life is a higher value than the environment. How can they then go on to say environment is number one above all others when they just said that the only reason they want environmental protection is simply to sustain life? Again, we look at this. Environmental protection. Why? Why do we want to protect the environment? And we agree, and the proposition agrees. We want to protect the environment because it provides a way to accomplish other values. Other values that are, yes.
Quite a few times since the beginning of your speech, you've said that you wanted to protect other values. We have said that our value is life and life with the environment. What are these other values that you've been mentioning for the past 5 minutes?
Well, I agree. Life is one of the values. Other values are quality of life. And as you just said, you have said life is your value, which is exactly proving our case. Life is the value the proposition proposes, not protection of the environment. Life itself. So the proposition is trying to say that because life is the number one priority, so should the environment be. Thus, we can see that there's no justification that environmental protection is the number one priority just because the proposition says it's necessary for life. Food is also necessary for life. So is shelter. So should these things also be the number one priority? Yes.
Would you not agree that food and shelter are directly linked to being able to live healthily with the environment?
Okay, but that still makes them a means to achieving a higher priority, which in itself is life. There could be hundreds, and there are hundreds of means to sustaining life. And all these means are simply instrumental goods. Food and shelter and the environment are simply ways to attain life. So environmental protection in and of itself is not a number one priority. Many things are essential and many things are priority. So they're just not number one. Now, throughout this entire speech and throughout the proposition speech, we've basically agreed that environmental protection only has value because it provides as a mean to other values, other higher values. If things are higher than environmental protection, how can one claim that it should be the number one priority? In this speech, I have showed you that the proposition arguments are false. They're claiming one thing and then claiming that another thing is true. Thus, we can see that environmental protection in and of itself has no good. Thus, it is obvious that environmental protection should not be made the #1 priority worldwide.
Thank you. I now call upon the second proposer speaker, Stephanie Murray, who will speak for 8 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, the opposition today is obviously very confused about what a #1 priority is. They seem to feel that because there are higher values, as they put it, such as the quality of life and the protection of life, that you cannot make the environment the #1 priority simply because we're trying to achieve other goals. I put it to you, Mr. Chairman, that if we were to make life or quality of life and name it as our #1 priority, if we were to take one single thing such as these higher values as suggested by the opposition and make it our #1 priority, then we would not be able to achieve them if we ignored the environment. Now, the purpose of making the environment the #1 priority is that it is linked to all of these higher values. We cannot say that the higher values suggested by the opposition are linked to everything else, but we can say that the environment is linked to every other value. Let me go on. Mr. Chairman, we know that the environment is linked to the economy because it is the basis of all life, because it is fundamental to survival. It has been pointed out by the first member of the proposition that if you want to protect human life, then you must be able to provide people's fundamental needs. You have to be able to... Yes.
Wouldn't you agree that if you were to protect a person's life, and environmental protection was essential to the protection of life, that in protecting life, the environment would also be protected?
I believe that in protecting life, if you were to put life as your #1 priority, that you would not be protecting all of the goals and all of the higher values as mentioned by the opposition that you would be protecting by using the environment. Now, we'll expand on all of the other on the goals that are achieved by protecting the environment as the #1 priority, because there are many higher values, as has been pointed out by the opposition. It simply would be ridiculous to make one of these other higher values the #1 priority, because you'd be ignoring so many other values. I'm going to talk about how the economy is linked to the environment, how our social problems are linked to environment, how our quality of life is linked to the environment, how all of these things cannot be protected if we do not protect the environment. But if you stand one of these on their own and make that the #1 priority, then you're ignoring some of these other values. So let me continue with discussing the economy. The Earth is simply not viable in economic terms anymore, Mr. Chairman, because our natural resources have been extensively depleted, and it has been pointed out by the first member of the proposition that the environment is fundamental. It is the basis of all life. We need, if you want to support people, you have to give them food and you have to give them water, and we cannot do this without protecting the environment. Now, the third world and the first world countries, everyone in the world must make it the #1 priority because they are all concerned with it. In order to live in the first world, we need natural resources that often come from the third world. We need the coffee beans, we need the rice, we need the fruit. Much of our food comes from the third world. And the third world, indeed, since they're producing these things, they must also be concerned with the environment. So in order to achieve economic development, in order to protect the quality of life, to give people food and water and all of the fundamental basics, then we must protect the environment. Now, secondly, in discussing social problems, now the opposition has said that the protection of life, well, maybe that should be the #1 priority. That's really what the proposition is saying. Well, I put it to you again, that if we are to relieve social problems, then the environment must be our #1 consideration. We cannot simply say that life is our #1 consideration by ignoring the environment.
Point of information.
Yes.
If the environment is so important, then why did we all come inside today to have this debate? I mean, aren't we here to stay out of the environment because it would be quite a bit of hassle to conduct this debate in the environment? Does the environment provide for good debating conditions?
I fail to see the relevance of the question. However, I do feel that the environment as defined includes air, land, water, life in general. We're primarily speaking of the living off of the earth and the existence of the earth. Now, Mr. Chairman, to continue, everything traces back to the environment. If we make our goal, if we realize that people are not very well educated in a third world country, for example, how do we solve this social problem? Well, first we must establish that there is a link between the people not being well educated and poverty. This is often the case. Poverty is often related to this. And what is related to poverty? Well, it's lack of food. What is related to lack of food and lack of water and lack of fundamental needs? That is related to the environment. Mr. Chairman, in a moment. Mr. Chairman, if we realize that everything traces back to the environment, then we know that if we want to relieve these social problems, if we want to develop economically, then we must protect our environment. Yes?
If environmental protection is the #1 priority, would it come above anything else whenever it's in conflict with anything else?
Now, later in my speech, I will be continuing to discuss what it means to make it the #1 priority and the implications, and so I will address that in a moment. Now, as I've been saying, everything traces back to the environment, so it must be the #1 priority because there is such a strong link, a strong relationship between the environment, our economy, our social problems, and the quality of life. Now, as for the point of information, the first member of the opposition wants to know exactly what it means to make it a #1 priority. Well, it has been mentioned by the first proposition that there are different levels of development appropriate to each country. That the third member of the proposition earlier asked, what does it mean? Does everybody have to agree? Do all nations in the world have to agree upon making it a #1 priority? Well, we would suggest that the manifestation of agreeing upon this is not really important. Whether it means that the United Nations interact some sort of agreement, whether it means that all countries sign some document saying that it's in the environment is our #1 priority, that's not important. What is important is the implications and what it means. Now, as the first member of the opposition wanted to know, does that mean that the environment comes first? Well, I'd suggest that the environment must be integrated into all decisions that are made. That when making political decisions, when deciding whether you're going to put a new factory in, that you have to integrate the environment in all decisions. So yes, it comes first. And why does it come first? Because if we think that we need to protect everything else, we must first protect the environment, because everything is linked to the environment, Mr. Chairman. We cannot protect one value without protecting the environment, and thus it must be our fundamental priority. Now, to expand on on the implications of making this our #1 priority. As was mentioned by the first member of the proposition, that we expect that developed countries must lead the way because they are in the best position to lead the way. They are more educated, they're best able to contribute the solutions. So research is fundamental to protecting the environment in considering pollution control, in resource management. We must also realize that the developed countries are best in the position to help underdeveloped countries who are not as readily available to research and to develop. So we're talking about cooperation, that it must be a worldwide priority because we are so interdependent. As I've mentioned, the third world countries and the first world countries are extremely linked. There's a strong relationship between the two because we depend on natural resources from the third world, for example. So we need to cooperate. We need to make it a worldwide effort if we are going to protect the environment, if we are going to protect quality of life and everything else. So the proposition today will show that it must be a #1 priority, not only that it should be. #2, that it must be a worldwide priority because we are so interdependent, and that it is fundamental and that it is linked to everything else in our society, and thus it must be our #1 priority. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call upon the second opposer, Christopher Regan, who will speak for 8 minutes.
One of the famed political essayists in America goes by the name of P.J. O'Rourke. He once made the extremely lucid observation that if the environment is so great, how come the homeless aren't more fond of it? We have a great problem of homelessness in the world. Homelessness devastates up to 3 million Americans. It is even more prevalent in other, less developed parts of the world. Now, the environment is not providing for these people. The environment in Bangladesh did not provide for the thousands of people that were washed out to sea with the hurricanes last year. The environment did not provide for the dozens of Americans who were killed when Hurricane Andrew hit Florida earlier this year, or rather, actually it's last year now. The environment does not provide for everything. The idea of shelter is very crucial because we are all in here to get away from the environment. Because if we were out there, we might be very cold. It also might be raining. It's a very bad idea to be out in the environment all the time. We have to harm the environment in order to do what we need to do to survive. Now, let me illustrate this point rather simply. How did you all get here today? Probably in a bus or in a car. A big, environment-damaging, pollution, American-created car. Well, look, these cars are damaging the environment, and yet no one should say that we should have all stayed home, or that we all should have walked many miles to get here, because we'd never have gotten started. We have to harm the environment in order to survive. We have to harm the environment, we have to take advantage of the environment in order to be successful. Now,
point of information?
Yes.
Yes. We of the proposition were wondering if you say that we have to harm the environment because in order to live a certain quality of life, we are proposing certain research. Wouldn't it be possible to research a certain automobile that wouldn't harm the environment and we'd still have that certain quality of life?
That's right, but you didn't drive one here today.
If we did make it the number one priority would be research, developing a great car that is great for the environment and not harmful.
And that's a wonderful idea, but it's not going to help us today. Of course, I acknowledge that if we can work towards means of not harming the environment, that's something we should do. But is it the most important thing we can do? Later, please. Now, if it's not the most important thing for us to do, it's obviously not the number one priority. And I really have to address the idea of the number one priority in terms of conflict. Because we can always see that priority is established in conflict situations. When you have a number one priority, obviously it comes before your number two priority. Now, if this idea of conflict holds through, we will see that the environment cannot be valued to the exclusion of everything else. Yes?
You stated that the environment was not linked. Well, you stated that in order to exist, we must harm the environment.
Yes.
And then you stated that perhaps it would be good if we were to develop things to protect the environment. You said it couldn't happen today. I would like to inform you that at no point in my colleagues' constructive speeches did they suggest that this would happen overnight.
Thank you, and your point is well taken.
It was a goal that wasn't attained.
But the point is that it is not the number one priority today. Otherwise, we wouldn't be putting off making these changes until tomorrow. Now, let me get back to this idea of conflict, because when we see that priorities are in conflict, we can see what our true number one priority is. Now, I'm going to ask you to take something on faith, a hypothetical situation, to help you understand my point. Suppose that protecting the environment would lead to loss of life. Suppose that protecting the environment would come at the expense of life in some situation. We would never protect the environment in that situation. No one would allow any other person to die to protect the environment. No one would allow their parents or their children to die to protect the environment. So what is our number one priority in terms of conflict? Excuse me, one moment. Our number one priority in terms of conflict is life. And the opposition, or rather the proposition, has proved this exquisitely. They have consistently referred to life as the most important thing that's going on. If life is the most important, it is the number one priority, and that is all there is to say. Yes?
Can you provide me with an example of a time when it would be necessary to sacrifice a human life in order to protect the environment?
Absolutely. If we're going to try to protect the environment in a place like Haiti, where there is widespread starvation, we might not be able to build water desalination plants, which they desperately need. We might not be able to build irrigation, because almost all industry harms the environment. You cannot build... No, not at this time. I'm still working on the last one. Now, we cannot build a plant to purify the water in Haiti unless we have industry, unless we smelt steel and release poisonous chemicals into the environment. Now, what are we going to do? Release those poisonous chemicals or let the Haitians drink poisoned water? We are going to build the purification plant because that is what they need to survive. And life is our number one priority. The environment is not. Yes?
Why is the water poisoned in the first place?
The water is poisoned in the first place because water exists dirty in its natural state. No matter how clean the rivers were, they were not pristine and pure of all damaging things before man got here. They have always been poisoned. We have always had to purify water. It isn't poisoned because of man. It just is. Water's dirty when you get it out of a river.
Point of information.
Yes.
Can you not drink water even if it has dirt floating in it? And haven't Indians been doing that?
Yes, you can also get cholera.
Is it not therefore true that pollution contributes to the destruction of the water, and that's why you need
and nature contributes that too. Thank you. Now, the point I'm trying to make here is that there's a need for balance in priorities. We can't go all out for the environment because it simply doesn't make any sense. Well, Mr. John Beatty, when he wrote the handbook for these worlds, explained 7 different priorities that he had in mind. He talked about research skills, leadership, critical thinking, educational excellence, warmth, and diversity. These are all things that we're trying to promote in this year's worlds. All goals and priorities that we're working towards. Do we place one of them above all the others? Do I place my desire to feel warmth and affection for the Canadian team above research skills and what's going on here? Well, I can't do that. I have to balance all these priorities. A proposition is refusing to acknowledge balance. They're saying the environment is number one. They're saying the environment is the top thing. But clearly it's not. I would argue it's much more important to get some clean water to these Haitians. Now, if they do not acknowledge this idea of balance, they're not being rational. Their whole case is not rational. What we need to do is acknowledge the need for balance in our priorities. Acknowledge that economic success, the quality of life, life itself, environmental protection, and many priorities are what guide our actions as human beings. This idea of balance is what will cause us to have success. This irrational belief that the environment is the top priority, that we should value it to the exclusions of the lives of Haitians, which are threatened because they are not allowed to harm the environment, perhaps because of some of the restrictions brought up at Rio. We can't allow this to happen. We can't take this approach. It's not sensible. Now, my first colleague, Suni, pointed out that the environment is an instrumental good. We value it because it's good for life. The proposition grants this completely. Why is the environment good? Because it protects life. Then what's our number one priority? Life is, clearly. Now, we've also seen that balance is very important. And in order to intelligently address our problems in this world, we have to have balance. Now, my friend Scott will come up and explain to you that when we have environmental protection as the number one priority, we do not encompass everything. We do not have everything. Specifically, we don't provide for those Haitians. He'll give some other examples and explain to you why. If we make life the number one priority, we are not going to have any problem protecting the environment. And that was also another reason to reject today's motion. But the most important thing today is the need for balance. The need to understand that we cannot put one thing ahead of everything else. We cannot value the environment to the exclusion of everything else. Hence, it is not our number one priority. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call upon the third speaker of the proposing side to execute the speech for 8 minutes.
Carbon dioxide levels in our atmosphere are raising global temperatures to the detriment of some fragile ecosystems that support life. Acid rain has destroyed aquatic life in thousands of lakes. Life-giving water sources have been poisoned by industrial waste. Soil erosion and desertification of agricultural land are undermining the Earth's ability to feed her population. And yet, Mr. Speaker, my opponents contend that environmental protection is not the world's number one concern at this time. Now, in opposing this resolution, my opponents have taken the step to define, they've taken it upon themselves to define priority. They have said that priorities develop when in conflict with something else. Now, ladies and gentlemen, in this case, this is simply not true. In fact, there is no conflict between the environment and other priorities. In fact, the environment is directly linked to the other priorities of which my opponents speak. There is no conflict between life and the environment.
Point of information.
Yes.
Are you suggesting here that we can pursue environmental protection as a number one priority to the exclusion of everything else and nobody's going to be harmed?
No, I'm not suggesting that at all. In fact, what I was just in the midst of saying is that the environmental protection is an integral part of protecting life on this earth. Just as environmental protection is an integral part of eliminating poverty on this earth, all other values, ladies and gentlemen, stem from the environment. Life on this earth stems from the environment. Indeed, the United Nations sponsored the World Commission on Environment and Development, and in this report they stated that, and I quote, "Environment precedes development and is the latter's prerequisite. No environment equals no development," end of quote. Ladies and gentlemen, we must lose this arrogant attitude that humans somehow are removed from the environment, that we can accomplish our goals without consideration for the environment. When it comes down to it, ladies and gentlemen, we have a relationship, just as every other creature on this earth has, with the environment. We can no longer ignore this. Now, yes, we are, at no point did we state, ladies and gentlemen, that the environment is the exclusive goal that we should be working towards. Rather, we have been proving that environmental protection is necessary to achieve any other goal, and that is why it must be the top priority. It does not mean that in a conflict situation we put the environment above life on this earth. What it means is that we recognize that life on this earth is a consequence of the environment. Indeed, the human's relationship with the environment has been compared to the relationship of a fetus in the mother's womb. Now, we have to recognize that the womb, the earth in this case, is our sustenance. It is our life. There is no conflict between life and the environment, ladies and gentlemen. There is no conflict between our state of being and the environment. The only conflict arises when we try to deny this relationship that we have with our earth, with our life-giving mother.
Point of information.
Yes.
Since shelter is also necessary for life, since we need protection from earthquakes and so on, should shelter also be a #1 priority?
I was going to get onto the fact, actually, that no, it is not a #1 priority, because the environment is our #1 priority. Yet, shelter too is linked to environment. Indeed, all our basic needs are linked to our relationship with the environment. Excuse me, I'd just like to finish answering the first point of information. You see, shelter, I was going to point out, and I might as well get to it now, that the opposers have taken a very limited view of the environment. Shelter, in fact, this building is part of our environment. Yes, shelter is important to life, and indeed, we construct our shelters, if you will, from things found in the environment. Therefore, cutting down forests, for example, would undermine our ability to adequately shelter ourselves. Wasteful use of resources, ladies and gentlemen, will undermine our ability to heat our shelters. Shelter, as you can see, is directly linked to the environment. Did the second speaker for the opposition have another point?
Yes, I do. Shelter is part of the environment. I believe your initial definition of environment dealt with air, water, and land. We are clearly not housed in a building of clay.
Actually, no, that's true. We are housed on a building of wood, which is a product of the land.
So you're really maintaining that this room is the environment.
And in fact, there is air that we breathe right in this environment. It is ludicrous to assume that we are separate from the environment, and this is my main point, ladies and gentlemen. Our relationship with the environment is primary, and therefore environmental protection is paramount. Now, the first negative speaker tried to convince you, ladies and gentlemen, that the environment is merely a means of achieving other priorities. And they gave the example of life. Now, life is only one example of this. And this is true, that through the environment, through environmental protection, we can achieve other goals. And I'm so happy to note that the opposers have recognized this relationship that we have, that all life is interrelated. And it is precisely because the environment is a means of achieving all other goals that we value, that it must be made our #1 priority. Now, if we make something else the #1 priority, ladies and gentlemen, as the opposers are suggesting, we should make shelter our #1 priority, it would be merely superficial. Because if in prioritizing shelter we destroy our environment, we will no longer have shelter. Because the environment is the basis. The environment is primary. This is the need. This is the #1 priority in all situations. The environment is the #1 priority in shelter, in protecting life. The #1 priority is the environment. Now, the last speaker for the opposing side stated that water is dirty when you get it out of the river. And this may be the case in the United States, but I would like to point out that this is a direct cause of the fact that #1 priority is not the environment in the United States. And this is why they are desperately trying to make it a priority all around the world by making water purification tables. Now, in fact, purifying water is admitting, ladies and gentlemen, that the environment is our one priority. The environment enables us to drink. It enables us to feed ourselves, and it enables us to shelter ourselves. The environment is our mother. We cannot deny this relationship. Now, yes, we do have motives. The opposers have pointed out that we have motives for protecting life as our main goal, and therefore the environment is not our main priority. Yes, we have motives for protecting the environment. However, those motives lead us to the conclusion that environmental protection must be the #1 priority worldwide. This is a problem that cannot be solved by individual nations. This is a problem that transcends national boundaries, and this is a problem that must be made #1 priority worldwide. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call upon the third opposing speaker, Scott Fuqua, who will speak for 8 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, what I'm going to do at the beginning of this speech is bring together the arguments of the opposition in this case. Now, you have heard SUNY, our first speaker, tell you that environmental protection is only an instrumental good because it only has value, as the proposition has gladly conceded, because it guarantees us life. Now, we are not contending that the environment is not necessary to preserve our life here on Earth, because obviously it is. However, the point that we are making here, and the point that the proposition has apparently missed, is that the environment in and of itself is not the #1 priority. They have not shown you why environmental protection in and of itself has any value. Indeed, they have shown you quite clearly that environmental protection has value only because it guarantees the continued survival of humankind.
Point of information.
Not the first minute of the speech.
Oh, excuse me.
Now, the point that I would like to make at this particular moment in my speech is that if environmental protection is an instrumental good and life is the ultimate goal, for example, of environmental protection, when we protect life, we are also protecting the environment. Consider, if you will, this example. An international terrorist has taken 2 hostages, myself and a spruce tree, which is instrumental to my continued survival for the sake of argument. Now, this international terrorist tells me that I have 2 choices. I can either save my life, or I can save the life of the tree. Now, because the tree is necessary to my survival, I will tell him, well, Mr. Terrorist, save my life. Because in doing so, I will also be saving the life of this spruce tree, because it is essential to my survival. Now, this situation correlates directly. Yes.
Okay. We were saying that I in fact said in my first initial speech that our natural instinct is to survive. Aren't you just explaining this now, that your natural instinct is to survive? And that is why we are proposing this value that will ensure that we will survive as a human race.
Yes, our natural instinct is to survive. But that's not the point. The point is that if we are going to value our survival and we are going to place our survival as a high priority, then anything that is a means to our survival, such as environmental protection, will also be considered. Now, with my example of the international terrorist, the way this relates directly to this topic is this. The environment and environmental protection, as the proposition has shown, is good and valuable only because it continues our survival on Earth. Now, if we were to put our continued survival on Earth as our #1 priority, or as a high priority, then obviously, by ensuring our survival, we will also be ensuring the protection of the environment, because the protection of the environment is essential to our survival. Now, one thing that must be made clear is that priorities are only established in conflict situations. You can't have two priorities if they're not going to come into conflict. If I could eat an apple and an orange at the same time, then I wouldn't have to make one of them a priority over the other, because they wouldn't be coming into conflict with each other at that particular time. Now, the reason this is so important in debating this particular motion is because what you see when you look at this analogy is that the proposition is telling us to take environmental protection at the exclusion of everything else when they come into conflict, even if environmental protection comes into conflict with life. Now, you heard my colleague Chris give you an example of the Haitian people and the water that they have to drink, and that environmental protection and life come into conflict in that situation. And if you were to go with the position of the proposition in this particular case, you would have to see that the lives of the Haitians would not be saved, because the environment, if it was the #1 priority, would be taken over the life of the Haitians. Now, the last speaker of the proposition made a comment about the water in the United States and how perhaps when we get it out of the streams it may be dirty. Well, even if this is true, the point is that it's like that for the Haitians. For the people in Haiti, the water is a dangerous thing to drink. And if environmental protection is going to keep them from purifying that water, then environmental protection can't be the #1 priority, because it is going to kill the Haitians in the long run. Obviously, that is not going to bring about any type of societal good. Now, the proposition is stated that environmental protection is only part of what is necessary to sustain life. Now, apparently, if there are other things that will sustain life aside from environmental protection in and of itself is not the #1 priority. Now, the proposition, again, has not proved that environmental protection is of value and good in and of itself. Now, this is a point that must be made. Yes?
Does it say anywhere in the resolution that, why do you suggest that it should be in and of itself? Have we not been proving conclusively that environment is linked to everything else?
The reason that environmental protection, that you must show environmental protection is good in and of itself, is because priorities are only established in conflict situations. This is another point that must be made extremely clear. If there was no conflict, then no priority would be necessary. The example that I gave before, if I could eat an orange and I could eat an apple, I had them both for lunch, and the option was open to me to eat them both, then I wouldn't have to make a priority, say, well, I think the orange is more important or the apple is more important, because obviously they haven't come into conflict, and therefore no priority is necessary. If we are going to make any type of prioritization, it is going to have to come out of a conflict situation. And in this particular case, we are looking at environmental protection as a #1 priority, coming into conflict with other aspects of our society, such as life, which goes back to the example of the Haitians. And in that particular case, if we took environmental protection as the #1 priority, which is what the proposition would like you to do, then we are going to subjugate life and other values that environmental protection is instrumental towards. Now, in this debate, you can see that the burden of the proposition clearly has not been met. They must show you either that environmental protection is good in and of itself, or that environmental protection is more important than life. And they have clearly done neither. Environmental protection is only an instrumental good. It is only good because it allows us to do other things. We are not, as the opposition, going to refute the point. There's no conflict here with the proposition. We will agree that the environment and environmental protection are indeed necessary to sustain life, which is precisely the reason that environmental protection should not be the #1 priority, why life should be the #1 priority. And I have shown you in this speech, with the example of the international terrorists and myself in a spruce tree, that if we protect the means, the goal that the good is trying to achieve, that the instrumental good is attempting to achieve, in this case being life, with the environment. If you protect life, you will also protect the environment, because the environment is necessary to sustain life. And it is for this reason that environmental protection should not be made the #1 priority worldwide. Thank you.
There will now be a 2-minute break in which the debaters will prepare for their replying speeches.
first 3 sets of speeches from each side, Dennis. I think we were all pretty excited seeing this clash coming between Canada and the U.S., but that's a pretty significant word here in debate, and that's the word clash, conflict. Did we see as much as we'd like to see in this particular proposition in the debating we've seen so far?
Well, I see alluding to it, but I didn't really see anybody come nose to nose with it like you really see as clash. They always talked about an example, but neither side really clarified or defeated it, the point, as much as I usually see in a clash situation.
I made a note myself that it seemed that maybe the issue was going to become priority. It didn't get a lot of attention in the definition, nor did they challenge that from the opposer side. And yet that seemed to kind of be the focus as they went further down. And so I almost felt like we were going to maybe get a clash on a word that didn't get defined as well as it could have been. And that may have been an issue that could have swung it one way or the other. Maybe we'll get a chance to see that in just a minute when they come back with some rebuttals, if they really focus in on this concept of priority. Anything else that you're looking for?
Well, I see the same thing. We've got life as a priority, environmental situation as a priority, and neither side has seemed to be able to grab something that's going to give them the edge. And so we're looking on the rebuttal for that, the winning edge, I guess, is what we're looking for. And perhaps that one particular question you said is, are they going to grab and say, what is the priority?
All right, we're going to be back for this rebuttals in just a moment.
The first issue I'd like to address is the issue of conflict. Now, in a couple speeches, my opponents have mentioned that they think we've redefined conflict. I disagree. We didn't redefine conflict, we merely interpreted conflict. We never argued with their definition. Their definition is acceptable. However, their definition is open to the interpretation we use. And I'd like to address the conflict issues first. This idea of the Americans made the water dirty, which is why we can't drink it, just isn't going to wash for 1 second. There is a large pool of cholera in the South Pacific Ocean. Scientists recently discovered it. Cholera is in the water. It exists in its natural state. I'm sorry, I didn't create it, and neither did any other American. Cholera and deaths from cholera were much worse before we industrialized, before we had all the technology that we have now. Cholera devastated many communities. The Black Plague was another problem that we don't have anymore because of our superior technology. Now look, cholera is in the water whether I put it there or not. We did not create the problem. The problem exists in the environment. We have to protect ourselves from the environment. All the examples I gave where we have to protect ourselves from the environment fell on deaf ears. They were never mentioned by the proposition. Now, they say that environmental protection can never conflict with life. Well, they're wrong. And they're wrong because they haven't addressed the conflict issues. They haven't addressed the idea of the foundries and the metals we need to make the water purification plant, or to make all the medical equipment that we need to create the cure for cholera. All these things take metal, and smelting metal and forging metal is damaging to the environment. So are the cars we use to get here. They simply won't acknowledge that anything that we do conflicts with the environment. Now, these are all important things. Can we make them less damaging to the environment? Maybe. And if we can, that's a good idea. But it isn't the #1 priority, because we've got to cure cholera. We've got to save those dying people, and that is more important than protecting the environment from some toxic gases. Now, there are also some specifics that need to be discussed. They brought up biodiversity and the extinction of species, and they've also brought up deforestation. Now, the extinction of species is part of nature's way. And while I won't deny that man has accelerated nature's way, natural selection and the death of weaker species in favor of new is something that always goes on. So is deforestation. I would like to point out that there are more trees in North America today than there were when the first colonies exist, because of the replanting we've been able to do. We've done it with big polluting trucks and dangerous technological means that have all damaged the environment, but they've also helped us protect the environment. One point that shouldn't get lost here is that the only way to protect the environment is with technology, and technology damages the environment. The need for balance is clear. Now look, they say we can't do anything without the environment, and I agree. If the biosphere disappeared, we wouldn't be here anymore. But we can't do anything without harming the environment. We can't save our lives without technological advances. We can't protect our lives without damaging the environment to some extent. The need for balance becomes clear. They say we can't do anything without the environment, and it's clear that we can't do anything without hurting the environment. So we got a catch-22 presented by the proposition. Women, You can't live with them, and you can't live without them. Either way, we're gone as far as they're concerned. We just can't do it. They are not acknowledging balance. And since they're not acknowledging balance, we're not going to get anywhere. We are only going to get somewhere if we acknowledge balance. The balance of priorities. The idea that it is our lives, our technology, our quality of life, our environment, and many other things is what's persuasive here. It's what's intelligent for us to do. We can't be just warm and open and friendly at the world. Neither can we spend all our time in the library and research. We have to strike a balance. We have got to strike a balance between protecting our environment and protecting ourselves from the environment. If you think the environment is the #1 priority, tell it to the Bangladeshis who were washed out to sea. It's just not right. It is not the #1 priority. It is not the most important thing. We have to strike a balance. We have to be rational. We have to be intelligent. We have to think clearly and without fanaticism. If of the many truths you select one and follow it blindly, it becomes a falsehood and you become a fanatic. So don't be a fanatic. Thank you.
I now call upon the second proposer, Stephanie Mari, who will speak for a maximum of 4 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, the opposition today has a very narrow view of our existence. They seem to feel that, #1, we haven't shown that the environment is good in and of itself, and that #2, we have not shown that it should be a #1 priority. Well, Mr. Chairman, let me first address why the environment is good in and of itself. Well, you protect the environment, that is good. It's good in and of itself. Now, the opposition would have you believe that the benefits we've mentioned about all the relationships between the environment and our economy, our social problems, poverty, and everything else, they would have us ignore that because there's not one simple reason why we should protect the environment. The fact is, Mr. Chairman, is that there are many reasons to protect the environment, and that it is fundamental to our existence. Now, #2, the third member of the opposition today talked about the spruce tree and the international terrorist. It's a great example, Mr. Chairman. And I'd like to say that what the opposition failed to consider is that we're talking about it being a #1 priority worldwide. In comparing one spruce tree to the life of one human, it may be a little insignificant to seem to save that tree. But if that terrorist had said, I will destroy the rest of the planet, I will destroy all the trees, or you can have your life, what would be the point of saving your life if you got rid of all the trees? Because we wouldn't be able to exist. We know that the environment is fundamental to our existence, and the examples brought up by the opposition today to try and refute our arguments have been insufficient. It has also been discussed the problems of water problems. Well, let us point out, Mr. Chairman, once again, that the water is part of the environment. And if you want to protect the environment, if you want to make that desalination plant, if you want to get rid of the cholera that's in the water, then you must look to the environment. Now, in the first place, part of the troubles in the environment were human-made. We know that there was a lot of pollution. Whether or not there's dirt floating around in the water, you can still drink it because dirt has minerals. The point is, Mr. Chairman, is that the damage done to the environment must be corrected. And the opposition has said, well, we have to make the water our #1 priority. You know, that may be fundamental. It's fundamental to our survival. We agree, and that's exactly what they're doing. That is not a refutation of our point. They're agreeing with us by saying that something like the desalination plant must take priority because they're putting the environment first. They're saying in order for people to survive, they have to have clean water. Thank you. We thank the opposition. Now, secondly, in the reply speech, it was stated that we must always harm the environment if we're going to survive. Well, I'd like to point out that the things that have been suggested, industry and technology, metal come from the environment. Metals come from the environment. Where do you get your coal? Where do you get your resources? You get them from the environment. Now, you may have to harm the environment in some instances in order to achieve certain goals, but we're not denying that everybody by the time this resolution is passed, that in the next day nobody's going to walk on a blade of grass. Mr. Chairman, it would be ridiculous to suggest that we're never going to harm the environment again, but we are going to safeguard and shield it from as much damage as we can, because it is fundamental to our existence, because it is linked to all of these other things, because it is linked to our economy, because it is linked to our social structure. Now, when we're talking about the homeless, what would be the point of putting a roof over the head of the homeless if we don't give them any food? I would suggest to you that many people would rather stand outside in the rain than not have a cup of soup from a soup kitchen, and the soup comes from the environment. Everything is linked to the environment. So the points addressed by the opposition today, they have suggested that we have not shown that the environment is good in and of itself. We have done that, and plus we've shown the benefits of that it is linked to everything else. And secondly, we've shown that it must be a worldwide and #1 priority, because we depend upon the environment for our existence. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to thank all the debaters for their presence here today and for the wonderful debate. I will give the judges approximately 2 minutes to independently decide the winners of this debate, and then they may retire into the staff room for up to 5 minutes to confer on the comments on which they wish to make.
All right, just had a several moments glimpse there at the judges, and of course this is their time. They're going to have to take a look at this and see how they've rated the various speakers, Dennis, and make their commitments and decisions, and we'll see. Of course, we have a panel of 3 judges. Maybe we can just quickly mention their names are Virgo, McCarthy, and Sloan. Unfortunately, I couldn't figure out who was who and all of that, but we will mention that they came from Bermuda, Australia, and then the 1 Canadian judge. Right. So this is...
well, you can see the reason for 3 judges or 5 judges or whatever, simply because when you get a debate this close, it comes down to the judges looking at something along the way that made the difference, and that's what we mentioned at the 2-minute break. What is going to make the difference? And
I'm going to ask you for your thinking on this in just a minute. I'm going to give you another minute. You know, the judges, they get a couple of minutes. While I'm doing that, I got just a quick wrap up here on some of round number 1, and that is that 4 losses on the proposition side. Tough to get this proposition across from first side. I believe the chairman is about to make a comment, so we'll want to take it back to him. Sure. If he was motioning for me. Maybe he doesn't want to make a comment. All right.
Wants attention, maybe.
If we go to him here in a minute, we'll do so very quickly. Sure. But let me just go back over that again. We had 4 winners from the negative side in round 1, and only 3 from the positive side. So that's not necessarily indicative. That could simply be skills level. But it was kind of the feeling I got often in debating, that the negative side kind of had a little advantage because they had a little more room to sway and attack, where the opponents, or the proposition positively stated, has to kind of stick with their guns.
And they really have to prove that that is the #1 priority. It should, and they've got to prove it. Whereas in the case of the opposers, they have to just convince the judges that they haven't. they haven't proved it to no unconditional. For example, they went on to life and said, well, it could be something else, like life or quality of life. So they tried to put something else in there instead of environmental concerns. And so that's where it comes down to now. Did the proposers, did the Canadian team convince the judges that the environment is the #1 priority by the examples given, by the way in which they presented? Did they have continuity in their teamwork? Was their presentation clear? Were their examples clear? And vice versa, the opposers, did they bring out the questionable points in their examples?
Well, let me just throw out a quick thought or two from my viewpoint, Dennis, and you more from perhaps an expert point of view might clear me up. But I felt like sometimes from a Canadian viewpoint, the examples weren't as clear. That the U.S. examples seemed to be very well thought out ahead and timely brought in, and suddenly we were in the middle of their example. On the other hand, I wasn't sure that their example always proved exactly what they wanted it to.
That's right.
Real clear, but muddied the water.
One thing I think they did better was when they took an example, they clearly explained it, whereas the Canadians would throw in an example but wouldn't really round it out. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And even though I put down here a couple of examples were questionable on the opposing team, they were examples that we understood. We maybe disagreed, but we understood them.
We understood them.
Yeah.
And that certainly is important in any communication, and that's what this debate is about, certainly developing these communication skills, and we did have to admire that. One other thing we noticed in this round of the debates from the Americans, the two young gentlemen, they sure did like to move.
Oh, yes. Yeah, for sure. Their style, they've got that confidence that comes out, and that exudes sometimes, and that makes a difference. Remember, style is one of the criteria for evaluations, one of the 3. And so that is a definite advantage when you do that and move around and show and use your hand gestures as you're speaking.
Did we see the conflict? This is what we're looking for. Did we find conflict in our last 2 speeches, the wrap-ups?
Yeah, well, in comparison to the earlier one, this was a more gentlemanly, if I can use that term, conflict. They didn't really jab each other like they really should in a clash. Again, they poked a bit, but they didn't really bury anybody, and so that's what's very difficult now for the judges.
We have a chance now to go to some questions.
The debate is now open to the floor of the House. If an audience member wishes to make a point, raise one hand and wait until you are called upon by the chair to speak. Speakers should stand up, address the chair, and keep their comments brief and to the point, and the debaters may answer their comments if they wish to do so. If there's anyone who wishes to make a comment. Go ahead.
It was intended all in fun. Really, they had their cracks about ugly Americans, and we had ours about women. Nothing personal, of course.
But one is based in fact, isn't it?
That's right. We love your Canadian beer, but look, we didn't put all the dirt in the water.
I would remind the debaters that they must raise their hand and address the speaker at all times. Are there any other comments? No other comments? It is the majority decision that this debate has been won by the opposers from the United States. I thank all the debaters for being here today and for the wonderful debate, and the judges will be back in a few minutes to make their comments to the debaters.
Well, the winners have been announced, and in this particular case, by majority decision, which means that 2 of the judges chose the Americans as the winner on this one, the team from the USA, and 1 of the judges would have chosen Canada. We won't try to figure out who that would have been, but just as I look back over the debate, and I really think that perhaps, as I look at it, maybe the difference was this Christopher Regan, the second negative speaker from the American team, who of course did their wrap-up as well. He was very strong. It was kind of the first really strong speech in the debate, and maybe he surprised us because he stepped away from the podium the way he did. Everybody else had been right up to the podium and kind of a bit stiff. He was certainly not as stiff and seemed to have real command of what he was going after. and comfortable in that way. But I'm just guessing. I don't know if he was the difference or not, but maybe the clarity of illustrations that you mentioned as well.
For sure. I mean, his enunciation was excellent. His manner was excellent. You could tell he'd done some research on it because he did use examples from all over the world, not just in America. And so that's a good sign. And when you're given that, and it's a close one, that didn't surprise me. That was a majority. You could have had 9 judges, and it could have been 5 and 4 type thing. So I think the Americans won because the judges decided that, and that's what competition's all about.
And we might just wrap up then, as far as the Canadians and Americans are concerned, now they each have 1 win and 1 loss. And we're now going to have an opportunity to hear the comments from the judges.
I think the 2 judges that gave it to the opposing team, there was a strength of team mind that sort of really rose to the challenge that was thrown out by the opposing team, whereas I think we felt that the opposing team perhaps didn't rise as well to the challenge putting out by the opposition team. Both teams have been congratulated on a very fine debate, the best one I've seen at the 2 Worlds that I've attended. I congratulate everyone, and I think we're all very welcome. We would welcome you to sort of come and speak to us about the debate afterwards to get a clear idea of what further we can look at for the rest of the week. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
All I said was it was real close, so we were right in that regards, as it was fairly obvious with the fact there was a majority as opposed to a unanimous decision. And feeling perhaps that the team link on the U.S. side was the difference.
Yes, they saw a cohesiveness there, and that's important, that each one agrees with the previous speaker and supports it and reinforces it.
And felt like maybe the link from speech to speech was just a little bit stronger, and the link was done fairly well, I think, in that regards. And,
you look back on the the process, and you can see that there is a relationship to anything they said, and they always come back to life, and that's great.
Yeah, well, this is certainly an exciting time for us here at McCoy High School at the 1993 World Schools Championships. The Americans and the Canadians now each with 1 win and 1 loss. You want to join us again tomorrow night at 7:30. Be looking for the next round that we'll be taping. In fact, I'll just mention to you that round 3 will be the team from Scotland and South Africa. South Africa was the team that beat the U.S. earlier, so we're looking for a strong showing from them, and once again they'll be in the negative. Scotland will be in the positive. Scotland lost in the positive before. South Africa won in the negative before, so they probably, we'd say, the South Africans will be coming in with a little bit of as a favorite. But for now then, that's the end of round 2, and this contest between the USA and the Canadians by a nip and tuck, says the judge, to USA. This has been a Monarch Cable 10 TV production. Certainly grateful for all of our volunteer helpers out here on the cameras and in the booth and in the truck. And look forward to bringing you subsequent rounds of this championship as we'll be traveling throughout Medicine Hat to the other high schools and eventually to the college for the wrap-up, and then even to City Hall for the finals.